While Martins told me how he went back to Anna's and found her gone, I did some hard thinking. I wasn't satisfied with the ghost story, or the idea that the man with Harry Lime's features had been a drunken illusion. I took out 2 maps of Vienna and compared them. I rang up my assistant and, keeping Martins silent with a glass of whiskey, asked him if he had located Harbin yet. He said no. He understood he'd left Klagenfurt a week ago to visit his family in the adjoining zone. One always wants to do everything oneself. One has to guard against blaming one's juniors. I'm convinced that I would never have let Harbin out of our clutches, but then I would probably have made all kinds of mistakes that my junior would have avoided. "All right," I said. "Go on trying to get hold of him." "I'm sorry, sir." "Forget it. It's just one of those things." His young, enthusiastic voice tingled up the wire. "You know, sir, I can't help feeling that we ruled out the possibility of murder too easily. There are 1 or 2 points—" "Put them on paper, Carter." "Yes, sir. I think, sir, if you don't mind my saying so, we ought to have him dug up. There's no real evidence that he died, just when the others said." "I agree, Carter. Get on to the authorities." Martins was right. I had made a complete fool of myself, but remember that police work in an occupied city is not like police work at home. Everything is unfamiliar. The methods of one's foreign colleagues, the rules of evidence, even the procedure at inquests. I suppose I had got into the state of mind when one trusts too much to one's personal judgment. I'd been immensely relieved by Lime's death. I was satisfied with the accident. I said to Martins, "Did you look inside the kiosk, or was it locked?" "Oh, it wasn't a newspaper kiosk," he said. "It was one of those solid iron kiosks you see everywhere, plastered with posters." "You better show me the place." "But is Anna all right?" "Police are watching the flat. They won't try anything else yet." I didn't want to make a fuss in the neighborhood with a police car, so we took trams, several trams, changing here and there, and came into the district on foot. I didn't wear my uniform, and I doubted anyway, after the failure of the attempt on Anna, whether they would risk a watcher. "This is the turning," Martin said, and led me down a side street. We stopped at the kiosk. "You see, he passed behind here and simply vanished into the ground." "That was precisely where he did vanish to," I said. "How do you mean?" "An ordinary passer-by would never have noticed that the kiosk had a door, and, of course, it had been dark when the man disappeared. I pulled the door open and showed Martins the little curling iron staircase that disappeared into the ground. He said, 'Good God! Then I didn't imagine him.' It's one of the entrances to the main sewer. And anyone can go down?" "Anyone. For some reason the Russians object to these things being locked." "How far can one go?" "Right across Vienna. People use them during the air raids. Some of our prisoners hid for 2 years down there. Deserters have used them, and burglars. If you know your way about, you can emerge again almost anywhere in the city, through a manhole or a kiosk like this one. The Austrians have to have special police for patrolling these sewers." I closed the door of the kiosk again. I said, "So that's how your friend Harry disappeared." "You really believe it was Harry?" "The evidence points that way." "Then whom did they bury?" "I don't know yet, but we soon shall, because we're digging him up again. I've got a shrewd idea, though, that Koch wasn't the only inconvenient man they murdered." Martin said, "It's a bit of a shock." "Yes? What are you going to do about it?" "I don't know. It's no good applying to the Russians, and you can bet he's hiding out now in the Russian zone. We have no line now on Kurtz, for Harbin's blown. He must have been blown, or they wouldn't have staged that mock death and funeral." "But it's odd, isn't it, that Koch didn't recognize the dead man's face from the window?" "The window was a long way up, and I expect the face had been damaged before they took the body out of the car." Martin said thoughtfully, "I wish I could speak to him. You see, there's so much I simply can't believe." "Perhaps you're the only one who could speak to him. It's risky, though, because you know too much." He said, "What shall I do?" "He won't leave the Russian zone now. Perhaps that's why he tried to have the girl taken over. Because he loves her? Because he doesn't feel secure? I don't know. I do know that the only person who could persuade him to come over would be you, or her, if he still believes you're his friend. But first you've got to speak to him." "I can't see the line." "I could go and see Kurtz. I have the address." I said, "Remember, Lime may not want you to leave the Russian zone when once you're there, and I can't protect you there." "I want to clear the whole damn thing up," Martin said. "But I'm not going to act as a decoy. I'll talk to him, that's all." Sunday had laid its false peace over Vienna. The wind had dropped and no snow had fallen for 24 hours. All morning, trams had been full, going out to Greene, where the young wine is drunk, and to the slopes of snow on the hills outside. Walking over the canal by the makeshift military bridge, Martins was aware of the emptiness of the afternoon. The young were out with their toboggans and their skis, and all around him was the after-dinner sleep of age. A notice board told him that he was entering the Russian zone, but there were no signs of occupation. You saw more Russian soldiers in the inner city than here. Deliberately he had given Kurtz no warning of his visit. Better to find him out than a reception prepared for him. He was careful to carry with him all his papers, including the laissez-passer of the Four Powers, that on the face of it allowed him to move freely through all the zones of Vienna. It was extraordinarily quiet over here on the other side of the canal, and a melodramatic journalist had painted a picture of silent terror. But the truth was simply the wider streets, the greater shell damage, the fewer people, and Sunday afternoon. There was nothing to fear, but all the same, in this huge empty street where all the time you heard your own feet moving, it was difficult not to look behind. He had no difficulty in finding Kurtz's block, and when he rang the bell, the door was opened quickly, as though Kurtz expected a visitor, by Kurtz himself. "Oh," Kurtz said, "it's you, Mr. Martins," and made a perplexed motion with his hand to the back of his head. Martins had been wondering why he looked so different, and now he knew. Kurtz was not wearing the toupee, and yet his head was not bald. He had a perfectly normal head of hair, cut close. He said, "It would have been better to have telephoned me. You nearly missed me. I was going out. May I come in a moment?" "Of course." In the hall a cupboard door stood open, and Martin saw Kurtz's overcoat, his raincoat, a couple of soft hats, and, hanging sedately on a peg like a wrap, Kurtz's toupee. He said, "I'm glad to see your hair has grown," and saw in the mirror on the cupboard door the hatred, flame, and blush on Kurtz's face. When he turned, Kurtz smiled at him like a conspirator and said vaguely, "It keeps the head warm." "Whose head?" Martins asked, for it had suddenly occurred to him how useful that toupee might have been on the day of the accident. "Never mind," he went on quickly, for his errand was not with Kurtz. "I'm here to see Harry." "Harry?" "I want to talk to him." "Are you mad?" "I'm in a hurry, so let's assume that I am. Just make a note of my madness. If you should see Harry, or his ghost, let him know that I want to talk to him. A ghost isn't afraid of a man, is it? Surely it's the other way round. I'll be waiting at the Prater by the big wheel for the next 2 hours. If you can get in touch with the dead, hurry." He added, "Remember, I was Harry's friend." Kurtz said nothing, but somewhere in a room off the hall somebody cleared his throat. Martin threw open a door. He'd half expected to see the dead rise yet again, but it was only Dr. Winkler, who rose from a kitchen chair in front of the kitchen stove, and bowed very stiffly and correctly with the same celluloid squeak. "Dr. Winkle," Martin said. Dr. Winkler looked extraordinarily out of place in a kitchen. The debris of a snack lunch littered the kitchen table, and the unwashed dishes consorted very ill with Dr. Winkler's cleanliness. "Winkler," the doctor corrected him with stony patience. Martins said to Kurtz, "Tell the doctor about my madness. He might be able to make a diagnosis. And remember the place by the great wheel? Or do ghosts only rise by night?" He left the flat. For an hour he waited, walking up and down to keep warm, inside the enclosure of the great wheel. The smashed Prata, with its bones sticking crudely through the snow, was nearly empty. One stall sold thin, flat cakes like cartwheels, and the children queued with their coupons. A few courting couples would be packed together in a single car of the wheel and revolve slowly above the city, surrounded by empty cars. As the car reached the highest point of the wheel, the revolutions would stop for a couple of minutes, and far overhead the tiny faces would press against the glass. Martins wondered who would come for him. Was there enough friendship left in Harry for him to come alone, or would a squad of police arrive? It was obvious from the raid on Anna Schmidt's flat that he had a certain pull, and then, as his watch hand passed the hour, he wondered, was it all an invention of my mind? Are they digging up Harry's body now in the central cemetery? Somewhere behind the cake stall a man was whistling, and Martins knew the tune. He turned and waited. Was it fear or excitement that made his heart beat, or just the memories that tune ushered in? For life had always quickened when Harry came just as he came now, as though nothing much had happened. Nobody had been lowered into a grave or found with cutthroat in a basement. Came with his amused, deprecating, take-it-or-leave-it manner, and, of course, one always took it. "Harry." "Hello, Rollo." Don't picture Harry Lyme as a smooth scoundrel. He wasn't that. The picture I have of him on my files is an excellent one. He is caught by a street photographer with his stocky legs apart, big shoulders a little hunched, a belly that has known too much good food for too long. On his face a look of cheerful rascality, a geniality, a recognition that his happiness will make the world's day. Now he didn't make the mistake of putting out a hand that might have been rejected, but instead just patted Martins on the elbow and said, "How are things?" "We've got to talk, Harry." "Of course." "Alone." "We couldn't be more alone than here." He'd always known the ropes, and even in the smashed pleasure park he knew them, tipping the woman in charge of the wheel so that they might have a car to themselves. He said, "Lovers used to do this in the old days, but they haven't the money to spare, poor devils, now." And he looked out of the window of this swaying, rising car at the figures diminishing below with what looked like genuine commiseration. Very slowly, on one side of them, the city sank. Very slowly on the other, the great cross-girders of the wheel rose into sight. As the horizon slid away, the Danube became visible, and the piers of the Reichsbrücke lifted above the houses. "Well," I said, "good to see you, Rollo. I was at your funeral." "That was pretty smart of me, wasn't it?" "Not so smart for your girl. She was there too, in tears." She's a good little thing," Harry said. "I'm very fond of her." "I didn't believe the police when they told me about you." Harry said, "I wouldn't have asked you to come if I'd known what was going to happen, but I didn't think the police were on to me." "Were you going to cut me in on the spoils?" "I've never kept you out of anything, old man, yet." He stood with his back to the door as the car swung upwards, and smiled back at Rollo Martins, who could remember him in just such an attitude in a secluded corner of the school quad, saying, "I've learned a way to get out at night. It's absolutely safe. You're the only one I'm letting in on it." For the first time, Rollo Martins looked back through the years without admiration, as he thought, he's never grown up. Marlowe's devils wore squibs attached to their tails. Evil was like Peter Pan. It carried with it the horrifying and horrible gift of eternal youth. Martins said, "Have you ever visited the children's hospital? Have you seen any of your victims?" Harry took a look at the toy landscape below and came away from the door. "I never feel quite safe in these things," he said. He felt the back of the door with his hand, as though he were afraid that it might fly open and launch him into that iron-ribbed space. "Victims?" he asked. "Don't be melodramatic, Rollo. Look down there," he went on, pointing through the window at the people moving like black flies at the base of the wheel. "Would you really feel any pity if one of those dots stopped moving forever? If I said you can have £20,000 for every dot that stops, would you really, old man, tell me to keep my money without hesitation? Or would you calculate how many dots you could afford to spare? Free of income tax, old man, free of income tax." He gave his boyish conspiratorial smile. "It's the only way to save nowadays. Couldn't you have stuck to tires? Like cooler? No. I've always been ambitious." "You're finished now. The police know everything." "But they can't catch me, Rollo. You'll see. I'll pop up again. Can't keep a good man down." The car swung to a standstill at the highest point of the curve, and Harry turned his back and gazed out of the window. Martins thought, "One good shove and I could break the glass," and he pictured the body falling through the iron struts, a piece of carrion dropping among the flies. He said, "You know the police are planning to dig up your body. What will they find?" "Harbin," Harry replied with simplicity. He turned away from the window and said, "Look at the sky." The car had reached the top of the wheel and hung there motionless, while the stain of the sunset ran in streaks over the wrinkled papery sky beyond the black girders. "Why did the Russians try to take Anna Schmidt?" "She had false papers, old man." "Who told them?" "The price of living in this zone, Rollo, is service. I have to give them a little information now and then." "I thought perhaps you were just trying to get her here, because she was your girl, because you wanted her," Harry smiled. "I haven't all that influence." "What would have happened to her?" "Nothing very serious. She'd have been sent back to Hungary. There's nothing against her, really. Year in a labor camp, perhaps. She'd be infinitely better off in her own country than being pushed around by the British police." "She hasn't told them anything about you?" "She's a good little thing," Harry repeated with satisfaction and pride. "She loves you." "Well, I gave her a good time while it lasted." "And I love her." "That's fine, old man. Be kind to her. She's worth it." "I'm glad." He gave the impression of having arranged everything to everybody's satisfaction. "And you can help her to keep her mouth shut. Not that she knows anything that matters." "I'd like to knock you through the window." "But you won't, old man. Our quarrels never last long. You remember that fearful one in the Monaco when we swore we were through? I'd trust you anywhere, Rollo. Courts tried to persuade me not to come, but I know you. Then you tried to persuade me to, arrange an accident. He told me it would be quite easy in this car. Except that I'm the stronger man." "But I've got the gun. You don't think a bullet wound would show when you hit that ground?" Again the car began to move, sailing slowly down until the flies were midgets, recognizable human beings. "What fools we are, Rollo, talking like this. As if I'd do that to you, or you to me." He turned his back and leaned his face against the glass. One thrust. "How much do you earn a year with your westerns, old man?" 1,000. "Taxed?" "I earn 30,000 free. It's the fashion. These days, old man, nobody thinks in terms of human beings. Governments don't, so why should we? They talk of the people and the proletariat, and I talk of the mugs. It's the same thing. They have their 5-year plans. So have I." You used to be a Catholic." "Oh, I still believe, old man. God and mercy and all that. I'm not hurting anybody's soul by what I do. The dead are happier dead. They don't miss much here, poor devils," he added, with that odd touch of genuine pity as the car reached the platform and the faces of the doomed-to-be victims, the tired, pleasure-hoping Sunday faces, peered in at them. "I could catch you in, you know. It would be useful. I have no one left in the inner city, except Cooler and Winkler. You really mustn't turn policeman, old man." They passed out of the car, and he put his hand again on Martin's elbow. "That was a joke. I know you won't. Have you heard anything of old Bracer recently? Had a card at Christmas?" "Those were the days, old man. Those were the days. I've got to leave you here. We'll see each other sometime. If you're in a jam, you can always get me at Kurtz's." He moved away, and, turning, waved the hand he'd had the tact not to offer. It was like the whole past moving off under a cloud. Martin suddenly called after him, "Don't trust me, Harry." But there was too great a distance now between them for the words to carry. "Anna was at the theatre," Martins told me, "for the Sunday matinee. I had to say the whole dreary comedy through a second time. Anna acted very badly. She wasn't much of an actress at the best of times. I saw her afterwards in her dressing room, but she was badly fussed. I think she thought I was going to make a serious pass at her, and she didn't want to pass. I told her Harry was alive. I thought she'd be glad, and that I would hate to see how glad she was, but she sat in front of her make-up mirror and let the tears streak the grease paint, and I wished afterwards that she had been glad. She looked awful, and I loved her. Then I told her about my interview with Harry, but she wasn't really paying much attention, because when I'd finished she said, "I wish he was dead." "He deserves to be," I said. "I mean, he would be safe then, from everybody." I asked Martins, "Did you show her the photographs I gave you of the children?" "Yes. I thought it's got to be kill or cure this time. She's got to get Harry out of her system. I propped the pictures up among the pots of grease. She couldn't avoid seeing them. I said, 'The police can't arrest Harry unless they get him into this zone, and we've got to help.' She said, 'I thought he was your friend.' I said, 'He was my friend.' She said, 'I'll never help you to get Harry. I don't want to see him again. I don't want to hear his voice. I don't want to be touched by him, but I won't do a thing to harm him.' I felt bitter. I said, 'You want him still,' as though I were accusing her of a crime. She said, 'I don't want him, but he's in me. That's a fact, not like friendship.' I prodded Martins on when he hesitated. 'Yes. Oh, I just got up and left her then. Now it's your turn to work on me. What do you want me to do?' 'I want to act quickly. You see, it was Harbin's body in the coffin, so we can pick up Winkler and Cooler right away. Kurtz is out of our reach for the time being, and so is the driver. We'll put in a formal request to the Russians for permission to arrest Kurtz and Lime. It makes our files tidy. If we're going to use you as our decoy, your message must go to Lime straight away, not after you've hung around in this zone for 24 hours. As I see it, you were brought back here for a grilling almost as soon as you got back into the inner city. You heard then from me about Harbin. You put two and two together, and you go to warn Cooler. We let Cooler slip for the sake of the bigger game. We have no evidence that he was in on the penicillin racket. He'll escape into the second Bezirk to Kurtz, and Lime will know you've played the game. 3 hours later, you send a message that the police are after you. You're hiding and must see him. He won't come. I'm not so sure. We'll choose our hiding place carefully. where you think there's a minimum of risk. It's worth trying. It would appeal to his pride and his sense of humor if he could scoop you out. And it would stop your mouth. Martin said, "He never used to scoop me out at school." It was obvious that he had been reviewing the past with care and coming to conclusions. "Do you agree?" He'd given me back the photographs of the children, and they lay on my desk. I could see him take a long look at them. "Yes," he said, "I agree." All the first arrangements went according to plan. We delayed arresting Winkler, who had returned from the second Bezirk, until after Kula had been warned. Martins enjoyed his short interview with Kula. Kula greeted him without embarrassment and with considerable patronage. "Why, Mr. Martins, it's good to see you. Sit down. I'm glad everything went off all right between you and Colonel Calloway. Very straight chap, Calloway." "It didn't," Martin said. "You don't bear any ill will, I'm sure, about my letting him know about you seeing Koch. The way I figured it was this. If you were innocent, you'd clear yourself right away, and if you were guilty, well, the fact that I liked you oughtn't to stand in the way. Citizen has his duties." "Like giving false evidence at an inquest?" Kula said, "Oh, that old story. I'm afraid you're riled at me, Mr. Martins. Look at it this way. You, as a citizen, owing allegiance, the police have dug up the body. They'll be after you and Winkler. I want you to warn Harry." "I don't understand." "Oh, yes, you do." And it was obvious that he did. Martins left him abruptly. He wanted no more of that kindly humanitarian face. It only remained then to bait the trap. After studying the map of the sewer system, I came to the conclusion that a cafe anywhere near the main entrance of the great sewer, which was placed like all the others in an advertisement kiosk, would be the most likely spot to tempt Lime. He had only to rise once again through the ground, walk 50 yards, bring Martins back with him, and sink again into the obscurity of the sewers. He had no idea that this method of evasion was known to us. He probably knew that one patrol of the sewer police ended before midnight, and the next did not start till 2. And so at midnight Martin sat in the little cold cafe in sight of the kiosk, drinking coffee after coffee. I'd lent him a revolver. I had men posted as close to the kiosk as I could, and the sewer police were ready when 0 hour struck to close the manholes and start sweeping the sewers inwards from the edge of the city. But I intended, if I could, to catch him before he went underground again. It would save trouble, and risk to Martins. So there, as I say, in the cafe, Martins sat. The wind had risen again, but it had brought no snow. There was no heating in the cafe, and Martins sat warming each hand in turn on a cup of ersatz coffee. Innumerable cups. There was usually one of my men in the cafe with him, but I changed them every 20 minutes or so, irregularly. More than 1 hour passed. Martins had long given up hope, and so had I, where I waited at the end of a phone several streets away with a party of the sewer police ready to go down if it became necessary. We were luckier than Martins because we were warm in our great boots up to the thighs and our reefer jackets. One man had a small searchlight about half as big again as a car headlight strapped to his breast, and another man carried a brace of Roman candles. The telephone rang. It was Martins. He said, "I'm perishing with cold. It's 1:15. Is there any point in going on with this?" "You shouldn't telephone. You must stay in sight." "I've drunk 7 cups of this filthy coffee. My stomach won't stand any more." "He can't delay much longer, if he's coming. He won't want to run into the 2 o'clock patrol. Stick it another quarter of an hour, but keep away from the telephone." Martin's voice said suddenly, "Christ, he's here! He's—" And then the telephone went dead. I said to my assistant, "Give the signal to guard all manholes, and to my sewer police, we're going down." What had happened was this. Martins was still on the telephone to me when Harry Lime came into the cafe. I don't know what he heard, if he heard anything. The mere sight of a man wanted by the police and without friends in Vienna speaking on the telephone would have been enough to warn him. He was out of the cafe again before Martins had put down the receiver. It was one of those rare moments when none of my men was in the cafe. One had just left and another was on the pavement about to come in. Harry Lime brushed by him and made for the kiosk. Martins came out of the cafe and saw my man. If he had called out then, it would have been an easy shot, but I suppose it was not Lime, the penicillin racketeer, who was escaping down the street. It was Harry. Martins hesitated just long enough for Lime to put the kiosk between them. Then he called out, "That's him!" But Lime had already gone to ground. What a strange world unknown to most of us lies under our feet. We live above a cavernous land of waterfalls and rushing rivers, where tides ebb and flow as in the world above. The main sewer, half as wide as the Thames, rushes by under a huge arch, fed by tributary streams. These streams have fallen in waterfalls from higher level, and have been purified in their fall, so that only in these side channels is the air foul. The main stream smells sweet and fresh with a faint tang of ozone, and everywhere in the darkness is the sound of falling and rushing water. It was just past high tide when Martins and the policeman reached the river. First the curving iron staircase, then a short passage so low they had to stoop, and then the shallow edge of the water lapped at their feet. My man shone his torch along the edge of the current and said, "He's gone that way." For just as a deep stream, when it shallows at the rim, leaves an accumulation of debris, so the sewer left in the quiet water against the wall a scum of orange peel, old cigarette cartons, and the like, and in this scum Lime had left his trail as unmistakably as if he had walked in mud. My policeman shone his torch ahead with his left hand and carried his gun in his right. He said to Martins, "Keep behind me, sir. The bastard may shoot." "Then why the hell should you be in front?" "It's my job, sir." The water came halfway up their legs as they walked. The policeman kept his torch pointing down and ahead at the disturbed trail at the sewer's edge. He said, "The silly thing is, the bastard doesn't stand a chance. The manholes are all guarded, and we've cordoned off the way into the Russian zone. All our chaps have to do now is sweep inwards down the side passages from the manholes." He took a whistle out of his pocket and blew, and very far away, here and again there, came the notes of a reply. He said, "They're all down here now. The sewer police, I mean. They know this place just as I know the Tottenham Court Road. I wish my old woman could see me now," he said, lifting his torch for a moment to shine it ahead, and at that moment the shot came. The torch flew out of his hand and fell in the stream. He said, "God blast the bastard! Are you hurt?" "Scraped on my head, that's all. Week off work. Here, take this other torch, sir, while I tie my hand up. Don't shine it. It's in one of the side passages." For a long time the sound of the shot went on reverberating. When the last echo died, a whistle blew ahead of them, and Martin's companion blew an answer. Martin said, "It's an odd thing. I don't even know your name." "Bates, sir." Gave a low laugh in the darkness. "This isn't my usual beat. Do you know the Horseshoe, sir?" "Yes." "And the Duke of Grafton?" "Yes." "Well, takes a lot to make a world." Martin said, "Let me come in front. I don't think he'll shoot at me, and I want to talk to him." "I had orders to look after you, sir. Careful." "That's all right." He edged round Bates, plunging a foot deeper in the stream as he went. When he was in front, he called out, "Harry!" and the name sent up an echo. "Harry! Harry! Harry!" They travelled down the stream and woke a whole chorus of whistles in the darkness. He called again, "Harry! Come out! It's no use!" A voice, startlingly close, made them hug the wall. "Is that you, old man?" it called. "What do you want me to do?" "Come out. Put your hands above your head." "I haven't a torch, old man. Can't see a thing." "Be careful, sir," Bates said. "Get flat against the wall. You won't shoot at me. Martin said. He called, "Harry, I'm going to shine the torch. Play fair and come out. You haven't got a chance." He flashed the torch on, and 20 feet away, at the edge of the light and the water, Harry stepped into view. "Hands above your head, Harry." Harry raised his hand and fired. The shot ricocheted against the wall a foot from Martin's head, and he heard Bates cry out. At the same moment, a searchlight from 50 yards away lit the whole channel, caught Harry in its beams, then Martin's, then the staring eyes of Bates, slumped at the water's edge with the sewage washing to his waist. An empty cigarette carton wedged into his armpit and stayed. My party had reached the scene. Martin stood dithering there above Bates's body, with Harry Lyme halfway between us. We couldn't shoot for fear of hitting Martin's, and the light of the searchlight dazzled Lyme. He moved slowly on, our revolvers trained for a chance, and Lyme turned this way and that way like a rabbit dazzled by headlights. Then suddenly he took a flying jump into the deep central rushing stream. When we turned the searchlight after him, he was submerged, and the current of the sewer carried him rapidly on, past the body of Bates, out of the range of the searchlight into the dark. What makes a man without hope cling to a few more minutes of existence? Is it a good quality or a bad one? I have no idea. Martin stood at the outer edge of the searchlight beam, staring downstream. He had his gun in his hand now, and he was the only one of us who could fire with safety. I thought I saw a movement and called to him, "There! There! Shoot!" He lifted the gun and fired, as he had fired at the same command all those years ago on Brickworth Common. Fired, as he did then, inaccurately. A cry of pain came tearing back like calico down the cavern. A reproach, an entreaty. "Well done," I called, and halted by Bates's body. He was dead. His eyes remained blankly open as we turned the searchlight on him. Somebody stooped and dislodged the carton and threw it in the river, which whirled it on, a scrap of yellow gold flake. He was certainly a long way from the Tottenham Court Road. I looked up, and Martin's was out of sight in the darkness. I called his name, and it was lost in a confusion of echoes, in the rush and the roar of the underground river. Then I heard a third shot. Martin's told me later. I walked downstream to find Harry, but I must have missed him in the dark. I was afraid to lift the torch. I didn't want to tempt him to shoot again. He must have been struck by my bullet just at the entrance of a side passage. Then, I suppose, he crawled up the passage to the foot of the iron stairs. 30 feet above his head was the manhole, but he wouldn't have had the strength to lift it. And even if he had succeeded, the police were waiting there. He must have known all that, but he was in great pain, and just as an animal creeps into the dark to die, so I suppose a man makes for the light. He wants to die at home, and the darkness is never home to us. He began to pull himself up the stairs, but then the pain took him and he couldn't go on. What made him whistle that absurd scrap of a tune I'd been fool enough to believe he had written himself? Was he trying to attract attention? Did he want a friend with him, even the friend who had trapped him? Or was he delirious, and had he no purpose at all? Anyway, I heard his whistle and came back along the edge of the stream, and felt where the wall ended, and found my way up the passage where he lay. I said, "Harry," and the whistling stopped just above my head. I put my hand on an iron handrail and climbed. I was still afraid he might shoot. Then, only 3 steps up, my foot stamped down on his hand, and he was there. I shone my torch on him. He hadn't got a gun. He must have dropped it when my bullet hit him. For a moment I thought he was dead, but then he whimpered with pain. I said, "Harry?" and he swiveled his eyes with a great effort towards my face. He was trying to speak, and I bent down to listen. "Bloody fool," he said. That was all. I don't know whether he meant that for himself, some sort of act of contrition, however inadequate, or was it for me, with my 1,000-a-year tax and my imaginary cattle rustlers who couldn't even shoot a rabbit clean? Then he began to whimper again. I couldn't bear it any more, and I put a bullet through him. We'll forget that bit, I said. Martin said, I never shall. A thaw set in that night, and all over Vienna the snow melted, and the ugly ruins came to light again, steel rods hanging like stalactites, and rusty girders thrusting like bones through the grey slush. Burials were much simpler than they had been a week before, when electric drills had been needed to break the frozen ground. It was almost as warm as a spring day when Harry Lyme had his second funeral. I was glad to get him under the earth again, but it had taken 2 men's deaths. The group by the grave was smaller now. Kurtz wasn't there, nor Winkler, only the girl and Rollo Martins and myself, and there weren't any tears. After it was over, the girl walked away without a word to either of us, down the long avenue of trees that led to the main entrance and the tram stop, splashing through the melted snow. I said to Martins, I've got transport. Can I give you a lift? No, he said. I'll take a tram back. You win. You've proved me a bloody fool. I haven't won, he said. I've lost. I watched him striding off on his overgrown legs after the girl. He caught her up and they walked side by side. I don't think he said a word to her. It was like the end of a story, except that before they turned out of my sight, her hand was through his arm, which is how a story usually begins. He was a very bad shot and a very bad judge of character, but he had a way with westerns. And Crabbin? Oh, Crabbin is still arguing with the British Council about Dexter's expenses. They say they can't pass simultaneous payments in Stockholm and Vienna. Poor Crabbin. Poor all of us, when you come to think of it.